Today is not only National Human Trafficking Awareness Day, it also marks the end of the 11th year of the Human Trafficking Task Force and the completion of the first year it has received significant funding from the General Assembly to staff and expand our coordination efforts throughout the state of South Carolina. You'll hear more about that in just a moment. The impact of this task force and the growth of the anti-human trafficking effort in South Carolina is truly remarkable. Given the complexities of human trafficking cases, the South Carolina Human Trafficking Task Force takes a strategic and multidisciplinary approach to combat this crime in our state. The task force is currently composed of 11 mandated members or agencies, 2 appointed non-governmental organizations, over 1,100 individuals, 12 subcommittees, a survivors advisory committee, and 10 regional task force, which we intend to expand to 13 regional task force in 2024. That's remarkable when you consider that we began with 15 people in a room back in 2012 when they passed the law. So that is an incredibly remarkable statistic. The people standing with me today are representatives of these various groups and organizations from across the state. Thank you to all the members of the task force for your hard work and perseverance this past year. I would like to now invite someone who comes every single year and who is an avid supporter of this task force and all of our efforts. And she and her husband have always supported everything we've intended to do here. I would like to invite First Lady Peggy McMaster for the presentation of a proclamation on behalf of her husband, Governor Henry McMaster. Miss Peggy. You were right there.
Now, therefore, I, Henry McMaster, Governor of the great state of South Carolina, do hereby proclaim January 2024 as Human Trafficking Awareness Month.
That's it. I think that's worth clapping for. Thank you. Your presence here sends a message, not on behalf of the governor, but it sends a message to the people up here today who are serving these survivors of human trafficking. So thank you, Ms. McMaster, for being here. Well, we love you, and we appreciate you being here. The state task force received its first funding appropriation of approximately $1.7 million last year from the South Carolina General Assembly. I want to thank the members of the General Assembly for their support. And I see a number of them out here flanking us to the left and right. I'm not even going to start to go down the name game here, but you know who you are, and I appreciate what you did. It was a significant amount of funding that has gone to many of our initiatives and obviously to staff up the task force. Because of this funding that I just mentioned, we are now seeing significant impacts from our staffing and initiatives around the state. A couple of those initiatives I'd like to talk about. For instance, this year, we launched a partnership with SCETV, Traffic Proof SC, a series of free, age-appropriate educational videos and curriculum catered to middle and high school students. This initiative serves as the first statewide human trafficking prevention education curriculum, highlighting the importance of educating youth and their families on the realities of human trafficking. Educators and community groups can submit requests for a state task force staff member to facilitate the Traffic Proof SC curriculum at their middle or high schools. And you can go to trafficproofsc.org or just visit our agency website to schedule that visit. This effort was promoted throughout the state with backpack giveaways during which over 3,000 backpacks with school supplies were handed out by regional task force. Additionally, the Task Force Interfaith Subcommittee worked with the regional task forces and faith communities to hand out thousands of goodie bags and awareness information during the trunk or treat events this past fall. In 2023, the task force hosted the first Survivor Advisory Subcommittee retreat. This retreat allowed us to gather survivors of human trafficking in an attempt to best align each survivor with state subcommittee efforts and receive input on our future initiatives. Last year, we started a new partnership with Soul Survivor, Inc. Inc. is spelled I-N-K. You'll understand why in a minute. We did this to recruit licensed tattoo artists and estheticians who would support survivors who had been branded by their traffickers. Sometimes they put the effigy of the trafficker on them, or they give them a number or some type of tattoo to signify that they are owned by somebody. These trafficking tattoo artists, these tattoo artists rather, are able to go in there and either remove that tattoo or cover it up with another tattoo, and they do this free of service, and so we're incredibly grateful. In 2023, the task force sent postcards to every licensed tattoo business in South Carolina to request their assistance and participation. Now, I am happy to announce that the first artist, Shannon Purvis Barron, joined right here in the Midlands, and there are numerous others applying currently and going through the vetting process, and I want to thank them for offering that service to survivors of human trafficking. Already in 2024, the task force has launched Travel Watch SC to bring awareness of the National Human Trafficking Hotline through partnerships with transportation and tourism sectors. A special thank you to airports that we launched this campaign with includes Columbia Metropolitan Airport, Greenville Spartanburg, and Myrtle Beach International Airport. With their support, those flying into South Carolina will know how to report potential incidences, and victims will know who to call to or text for support. We will continue to bring similar efforts to the travel and tourism locations throughout this coming year. And we talked about that funding we got a year and a half ago. It allowed us to put on these initiatives, but those initiatives don't put themselves on. It's the team, it's the people, it's the bodies, it's the men and women out there that do it. The team that made these programs happen includes Catherine Moorhead, who is serving as director. She stands in my shoes every day for the State Human Trafficking Task Force, and she just completed, or is in her 8th year in that position. And Catherine could not do this without you. I mean, look at your efforts. It's really, what an amazing job. Now, as I give Catherine credit, she would turn around and say, General, tell the real heroes of this staff task force. Well, we have up here today Monique Garvin, who is her deputy director for the Human Trafficking Task Force. We have program coordinators who are on board to support the regional efforts, task force subcommittees, and statewide initiatives like Mandy Bowden, James Massey, and Aria Rejmi. They are also up here today, and I want to thank them. Now, we're also being incredibly aggressive with our prosecution and law enforcement efforts. So in the prosecution arena, Megan Raymer, one of our assistant attorney generals, joined as our first human trafficking prosecutor, and Kevin McWiggin as our investigator, with Glenna Fogel as the victim advocate to complete our human trafficking prosecution team. I am incredibly proud of that. In 2023, the task force also welcomed a new training and outreach program assistant, Melanie Williams, as a graphic designer, Mark Cardwell, and the 2 prevention education coordinators, Ashley Bishop and Hensley Parks. In a minute, you'll get to see the trafficking report we put out, and it looks so much better, and it's so much more tight, more narrowly tailored. It's easier to read because of those. So thanks to those people who made that a possibility. Soon, the task force will welcome a program assistant to aid the outreach efforts, a 4th program coordinator for the PD area, and a data analyst who will work to develop a statewide comprehensive data collection system. Now, I want to talk about the sources of the data that feed this report. Now, Ms. Peggy, I always cite your husband because I heard him say this years ago, and I say it every year, and I think it's truly important. But in order to properly manage a problem, you must properly measure a problem. That is why the collection of data is so important. In 2023, the task force used 3 primary sources of data for the report. Now, it's important that sometimes these 3 reports might provide data that seems to contradict each other. But for instance, some of the National Human Trafficking Hotline always lags a year because they're cleaning the data. The data cleaning process is cleansed, and that takes a year. So when I read the data from the National Hotline, that will be from 2022, okay, not 2023. And of course, every section that collects data collects it from how they intersect with the human trafficking as a crime. So you might see different takes on the data. It doesn't mean that it's contradicting. It means it's just a different take on it. First, I want to start with the first source of our data. That's our State Law Enforcement Division, SLED. the State Law Enforcement Division continues to lead efforts in conducting human trafficking investigations on both behalf of the Governor and the Attorney General's office while providing technical assistance and manpower to other law enforcement agencies. Lieutenant Jade Roy leads the Human Trafficking Unit at SLED and serves as the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Subcommittee of the State Task Force alongside Captain Connie Sonnefeld. In 2023, the SLED Human Trafficking Unit opened 357 investigations in 40, and I'm going to repeat this, in 40 of the 46 counties. These investigations involved 498 potential victims of both sex and labor trafficking. Of the victims, 460 were minors and 38 were adults. Additionally, 392 were female and 106 were male. I want to take this moment right now. When I say 460 of those alleged victims were minors, the state is woefully inadequate in providing transitional housing and places for minor victims of human trafficking to go. We have one facility in the entire state to serve all of the states, and we intend to ask for that to be addressed in this upcoming budget. And it's not just coming from the Attorney General's office, it's coming from the entire task force. You'll hear more about that in just a moment. Now, all of this work that I just talked about and the data that was collected, this work was achieved by Captain Sonnefeld and Lieutenant Roy alongside members of their team, including Lieutenant Roshni Parikh, Special Agents Logan Fye, Tyler Richardson, Andrew Beasley, Corey Hammond, and victim advocates Charlene Mooneyham and Riley Gale. Chief Keel, I want to commend you and your team, especially you for your leadership and for their efforts. Your dedication to working these often difficult cases is something that we rely on, and I could not do my job if you and your team didn't do yours, and I want to publicly thank you. What a great partner, what a great ally you have been across the board. So let's give SLED a round of applause. I would like to thank also, and I thank Chief Keel, but the Sheriff's Office, local law enforcement, federal agencies for their work in investigating these cases and for their efforts toward combined collaboration. A great example of the collaboration I just talked about is that in the summer of 2023, so this past summer, we saw a complex investigation and prosecution in Florence and Darlington counties of a juvenile human trafficking case reach resolution when on the eve of trial, Jason Pope, a.k.a. DJ Kid, pleaded guilty to 5 counts of sex trafficking of a minor, 5 counts of criminal sexual conduct with a minor, and 3 counts of criminal sexual conduct. Mr. Pope was sentenced to 30 years, suspended to 19 years in prison. After he gets out of prison, he will be on 5 years of sex offender probation and will face up to 10 more years in prison if he violates the terms of his probation. He will also be on the sex offender registry, and he has permanent restraining orders that prohibit him from having any contact with any of the identified victims in that case. Special thanks to all of the investigators, victims advocates, service providers involved in bringing that defendant to justice. This case truly exemplified the multitude of state and local agencies, how much they can accomplish when we all and they all work together. The prosecutors, by the way, I always like to give a shout out to my team in my office. Prosecutors in that case are Heather Weiss and Megan Raymer. They prosecuted that case. Where are Megan and Heather? Literally getting my back, literally, right behind me. Thank you guys. What an amazing job. I'm so proud of our team. Now, the second source of data, I gave you some of SLED's data. The second source of data we have is what we get from, in 2023, from court administration. In 2023, there were 21 new defendants added with 46 charges of human trafficking brought in South Carolina state courts. As of this report, there are 31 human trafficking defendants with 65 cases pending in South Carolina state courts. Our third source for our data, the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Our partnership with Polaris, who runs the National Human Trafficking Hotline, positions us to gather and release data each year. Now, I want to remind you that the data that I'm about to give you reflects numbers from 2022. So any changes in data would be from 21 to 22, okay? So here's a snapshot from Polaris's Human Trafficking Hotline. In 2022, there were reported 90 human trafficking incidents reported from South Carolina, which would have been down from 124 the previous year. The number of victims recorded from the hotline in South Carolina was 194 victims, which was down from 277 victims the previous reporting year. Now, if you want to go in and see more about this data, it breaks it down among age, geography, trafficking victim, labor trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking victim. You can get all of those details, and I would encourage you to go pull up the annual report. This annual report right here, which we put forward, has now been released. You can go to our website and download it. It's about 50-something, 60 pages. However, if you're like me and you're busy, you can actually download the executive summary, which is 2 pages. It's kind of like watching the movie trailer as opposed to the movie. It gives you the highlights, right? So I would encourage you to go to the website and download, and you can get all of these numbers in greater detail. Now, in the Polaris numbers I just talked about, that's where we get where the top 5 counties are, the top venues for sex or labor trafficking, as well as the types of relationships. I'm not going to give you all of that because you can go to the report and read it, but I will say that this year's top 5 counties, the top 5 counties are filled by 8 counties because there's 3 ties. There's a tie for first place, and this, again, is the number of calls made to the hotline. The number 1 counties, Greenville and Horry County, round out number 1 for the most trafficking reports. Number 2 is Charleston. Number 3 is another tie, Richland and Spartanburg. Number 4 is Aiken. And number 5 is another tie with Lexington and Orangeburg. I want to remind people, that doesn't mean that there's more human trafficking occurring in those 8 counties. That just means that's where people are seeing and identifying and making calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So, as I said earlier, SLED has 40 cases in 40 counties out of the 46. So that doesn't mean there's no human trafficking. That just means people are picking up the phone and saying, hey, I suspect something. Just wanted to distinguish that. I want to close now. As we look to the future, we intend to increase the number of shelters available to child human trafficking victims. I mentioned earlier the number of kids involved in these alleged crimes, and there's only 1 facility in the state. We need to open up shelters around the state. These shelters will provide much needed safety and care and provide services to both the children and their families. And one thing I need you to know is that in the top 5 relationships that traffickers have with victims is usually an intimate partner or a family member. Those are always in the top 5. Sometimes you cannot return a 14 or 15-year-old child back to the family where the trafficking occurred. And there's only 1 place to go in the state. So the task force unilaterally got together. We've met a number of times, and we are asking the General Assembly for significant funding to open up additional shelters around the state. It would be through a grant program, okay, so that people would apply. It would be vetted. There would be complete transparency on how that money is being spent. But that is going to be one of our major initiatives this year, and it will truly make South Carolina the tip of the spear on the war on human trafficking. So to the members of the General Assembly, we intend to come to you this year to ask for that funding to support the grant opportunities to make these shelters and services a possibility. And so for those who are here today, I'll be coming to your office or your committee soon. But I do want to say thank you to those members of the General Assembly who are here today. They could be anywhere else. They're here, and there's others who wanted to be here and will be here. And what I love about this issue is it's bipartisan. Everyone comes together. I've never gotten pushback, and I truly, truly appreciate men and women serving in the legislative branch of government. In closing, under the Office of the Attorney General, the State Task Force will continue to work with stakeholders on the issue of trafficking in South Carolina. We will lead those efforts. Thank you to all the members of the General Assembly. I want to thank the governor. I want to thank everyone who is up here today and the organizations you represent, our law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, healthcare providers, direct service providers, our state subcommittees, our regional task force, survivors, who we get a great deal of input from, partners and others working tirelessly. Thank you for working tirelessly to prevent this crime from ever occurring with someone again and helping us eliminate this crime. This pretty much concludes this press conference, but again, we had a lot of success in 2023. The future is looking bright for how we combat human trafficking going forward in 2024. And again, to everyone here today, I'm going to end the way I began this press conference. Every one of you plays an important role. Thank you. Every one of you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart and our team's heart. We appreciate what you do. We're going to eliminate human trafficking. If you're a victim or a survivor of human trafficking, you look up here and you can see that there's an army of men and women ready to serve and support you and protect you. And to the traffickers out there, people who are exploiting human beings for profit, look up here. There's an army who's coming for you. Thank you. This concludes the press conference. I'm happy to take a question or two, and then we're going to, what does human trafficking look like? It could be how a teenager is acting, how someone is being treated. One story I love to tell is anecdotal, and it's years and years ago, but it's a story of a flight attendant on a plane who was serving drinks to people, and she came up, and there was an older man and a younger woman. She couldn't tell their ages, but he would not let her talk. Whenever he would say, "What do you want to drink?" he would answer for her. If she tried to answer, he would kind of step on her words and respond for her. And it just something didn't seem right. It could have been nothing, but when the woman got up to go use the restroom, the lavatory on the plane, the flight attendant went into the lavatory first and on a sticky note wrote, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Something just didn't seem right. And she left the lavatory. The flight attendant went in there and saw the note, and the note said, "Yes, I do need help. I'm being trafficked." And the flight attendant was able to go to the cockpit. The pilots phoned ahead to where they were landing, and that individual was apprehended right there at the jet bridge before they even entered. And so that is an example. I was doing a presentation a little over a year or two ago, and a pastor at a church here in Columbia was telling me that he was going into a grocery store, and there was a woman sitting in a car, and she kind of breathed on the glass, and the condensation, fogged it up, and she wrote in reverse, "Help." And he was able to call law enforcement to come and try to interdict that situation. So, it could be how you see someone being treated. It could be someone, there are people who've been trafficked in school. Their grades are going down. You start to see them use drug use. Now, just because they're using drugs doesn't mean they're being trafficked, but oftentimes there are other conduct that is kind of being bootstrapped to the trafficking. You're starting to see someone become solitary, remote, cold away from their family, their friends, society. That's usually the sign that someone is trying to pull them away from their support group. Anytime you see something, you can make an anonymous call to the hotline. You can call local law enforcement. I would rather you err on the side of over-reporting and it end up being nothing than under-reporting and then a child or a victim slips through the cracks. A little over $10 million for the shelters. Yep, so we are asking for that funding. We're obviously going to be doing that report when I go before my subcommittee here in the next week. Well, yeah, thank you, Catherine. That's why I keep her right here in earshot. Traffic Proof SC. Obviously, and also our partnership with SCETV. An ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. Call the Human Trafficking Task Force. We can deploy people to your schools, to your churches, to your communities to educate. And again, we can make it age appropriate. We can have a more involved, more detailed, for adults. We can have a more sanitized version for younger children, but we can present them the curriculum that they need to understand human trafficking. We'll come to your schools, your neighborhoods, your churches to do presentations. We have that curriculum already designed for teachers and school administrators to use. And of course, wherever two or more gather, I will go and do a presentation. But more importantly, Catherine and her team that staff the task force and work with our partner agencies up here and organizations, we can send people all over the state, either at the regional or state level, to do these presentations to educate people. But the more people know, remember, you are the last line of defense from being a trafficking victim. You are the last line of defense. We can't be everywhere people are. So educating them and giving them, and that's why I do think that there is a reduction. I do think education as a component of prevention is aiding that reduction in the number of reports. That is my personal opinion. So that's what we're going to continue to do. I used to be, when I was in the Attorney General's office as a prosecutor working for her husband, and in the solicitor's office, I prosecuted a lot of sex crimes cases. And the number of parents of kids that I talked to during that time, in my personal prosecution of cases, who said, "I never dreamed that this would happen to me," or "I never dreamed that this could happen to my child." I know that Heather and Megan and other prosecutors up here, Chief Keel and his agents probably could tell their own stories. Almost every victim never expects to be a victim until they're a victim. And so please don't assume that your child is above being preyed upon, or don't assume that you're above being preyed upon by these people. They are very slick. They are very I mean, they're using technology now. I mean, they are getting in there, and they are getting into people's lives. And they remember, the devil appears as an angel of light. Human traffickers don't show up looking seedy and disgusting. I mean, most human traffickers have a relationship with the victim or the family. So it's not like a movie where someone's a snatch and grab and you're thrown in the back of a van and the perpetrators are wearing ski masks. Usually it's a gradual. And one other thing I want to say, I've spoken to survivors before who've actually said they didn't even realize they were a trafficking victim while they were being trafficked. It's such a slow boil, they don't even know they're being baked into that system. And so educating them that, yes, this can happen to anybody, any socioeconomic class, any race, you know, man, woman, it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, anybody can be trafficked and anybody can be a trafficker. Look, the most important thing for us is for victims to understand that, and remember, the victim is usually involved, and there's a million ways to do this, but the victim doesn't always start off as a victim of human trafficking. Maybe they're dating someone and they're selling drugs and they're committing a crime themselves, and then that evolves into their trafficker saying, hey, we're not making enough selling drug X, so you need to sell something else, and they start getting pushed into that lifestyle. Then all of a sudden, they're looked at as colluding or collaborating with the criminal, and so they think that they are a target of law enforcement, and that is classic. That is what the trafficker wants to do. The trafficker wants you to be afraid to report. They want you to feel like if you report, you're the one going down. And so to victims out there who are currently being victim, if you find yourself in that type of relationship, please call the National Trafficking Hotline. Call law enforcement first. Call law enforcement and report this to law enforcement, or tell someone you trust that you love to call law enforcement if you don't think you're able to. But the number one goal of this task force and our law enforcement agencies is to get the trafficker, not the trafficking victim. Okay? The trafficker, the person who is selling human beings. That's who we want. We want to put them under the jail. And so that's what I would say to victims out there. We're going after the person who is buying and selling you to put them away forever.